Welcome. I am Teresa Lua from the Philippines. I am serving as the director of the Global Theology Department of the World Evangelical Alliance, but my full-time work actually is as General Secretary of the Asia Theological Association, or ATA. And with me here is Perong. Perong, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Perong, or Perong Lin, or Lin Perong if you come from Singapore and you know how names are presented. I live in Germany. I work with the World Evangelical Alliance, and I have the privilege of trying to make the World Evangelical Alliance known to more people. I am the Deputy Secretary General for Operations, and I'm very excited and happy to see so many of us here together. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Perong. And this conversation actually is the third in a series of conversations that will happen. So we had the two previous webinars, and Perong was part of that. And also Ray Crisaldo. Actually, you will not be able to see Ray at this time, but he will be very busy. In fact, right now he's already busy chatting. So he will be monitoring the chat messages, and especially the questions. And then at the end, he will be providing a summary. So later you will see him. But before we go into the actual conversation, I would like to ask Perong actually to give us an overview or summary of the two previous conversations so that we can situate this conversation in that context and that we are on the same page. So Perong, please take it away and give us the summary.
Thank you very much, Ate Teresa, as people in the Philippines go. So last January, I found myself in Dallas in the middle of a meeting with a few Texan businessmen talking about what does it mean to be an evangelical. We were talking about politics, we were talking about the global faith, we were talking about Jesus, we were talking about so many things. And what was very interesting was different people had different ideas. So sometime last fall, we discussed with our friends from the Kirby Laing Public Theology School in Cambridge, and we discussed about, can we not think together about what does it mean to be an evangelical? The WEA, with the name World Evangelical Alliance, has this name for good or for bad, I think for good. And so we thought that we would love to be the ones to think about this together. So when we started this webinar, from a global perspective, thinking about the definition of what does it mean to be an evangelical. One of the most known definition is from the Babington Quadrilateral, and while it was made in the 70s, we discussed about its relevance today. So let me just give you 4 different aspects of this quadrilateral. Firstly, the commitment to the Bible. It's cross-centered. Thirdly, it's conversion necessity. And fourthly, activism in spreading and living out the gospel. In our first panel, we discussed whether do we need to add more themes to this Babington Quadrilateral. For example, our Pentecostal friends thought that it was extremely important to think about the Holy Spirit and the spiritual focus. We also thought about how the word evangelical is also transdenominational and transconfessional. And yet at the very same time, in a very context-specific, there is a very context-specific character of how evangelicalism is seen in different countries. So that happened in the first webinar. In the second webinar, we wanted to think a bit more about society and politics and how this word plays out. What was clear was that the word evangelicalism is different in different countries. We had at that point in our webinar, the AEA, the African Evangelical Alliance General Secretary, Dr. Mastab, and he shared with us about how from an African perspective, to be an evangelical also means the commitment to politics, commitment to some of the big political ideas for society. What was clear was that the word evangelical has a theme that is outside dogma and theology. And so today we wanted to think about with all of you, what does it mean to be an Asian evangelical? Someone asked in the chat box, who am I? I am a Singaporean. I was born and bred in Singapore. I left maybe when I was 26, 27. And it was interesting to suddenly come up with the idea that my identity was an evangelical. All my life, I thought of myself as a Christian, and then living in Europe now, some of my European friends will know that when you go to the census board or where you need to register, they will ask you, what is your religion? And so I told them I'm a Christian, and they just looked at me blankly because they had very clearly, are you a Lutheran? Are you a free church, and so on and so forth? And that it was when it was clear to me that I had to think about what does it mean to be an evangelical even for myself. So today, my hope is that as we think about this together, we will all be clearer about what our faith means in the way we live our lives. Over back to you. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Pero, for that overview of the past two webinars. Now, it's my privilege to introduce to you our distinguished panelists. We're really very grateful for these people because they're all very busy, and we know that it's not easy to bring them all together coming from different time zones. One of them is currently in the US. Then we have one from India, we have from Korea, and Singapore. So, but praise the Lord that they're all available. Allow me to introduce each one of them. First is Dr. Jail Cornelio. He's Professor of Development Studies at the Ateneo de Manila University and visiting professor at the University of Louisville's Center for Asian Democracy. He is there at the moment. A sociologist of religion, Professor Cornelio has dedicated his research to studying the impact of religion on public life in the Philippines, especially on controversial topics such as divorce, gender equality, and the war on drugs. He's author and co-editor of several books, including People's Christianity, Theological Sense and Sociological Significance, and the Routledge International Handbook of Religion in Global Society. Thank you, Dr. Cornelio, for joining us. The second, we have Dr. Simon Chan, formerly Ernest Lau Professor of Systematic Theology at Trinity Theological College in Singapore. He's the editor of the Asia Journal of Theology. He's author of several books, including Grassroots Asian Theology, Thinking the Faith from the Ground Up, Spiritual Theology, a systematic study of the Christian life, and Liturgical Theology, the Church as Worshiping Community. These are highly acclaimed books. He also wrote the chapter on Evangelical Theology in Asian Contexts in the Cambridge Companion to Evangelical Theology. I'm sure all of us know Dr. Simon Chan. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Dr. Jong Suk Lee, Professor of Church History at Torch Trinity Graduate University in South Korea. She is the first woman president of the Church History Society in Korea and the first woman and fifth president at Torch Trinity Graduate University. I'm proud to say she is our vice chairperson of the Asia Theological Association. She has been a member of our board for many, many years. She's also a member of the board of the Oxford Center for Mission Studies. And she's the recipient of Distinguished Alumna Award from Princeton Theological Seminary in 2020. Thank you, Dr. Jung Suk, for joining us. And last but not the least, we have Dr. Samuel Richmond, Dean and Faculty of Interfaith and Religious Studies at Northeast Christian University in Nagaland. As an educator, pastor, musician, and eco-theologian, he advocates for creation care in Asia and bridges science and theology. He is also serving as secretary for the Theological Commission of the Evangelical Fellowship of India and as project support officer of the Sustainability Center of the World Evangelical Alliance. He's also an author and editor of several books. And he is currently writing a book on green missiology, developing creation care theology for Asian contexts. Very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Richmond, for joining us. So these are our distinguished panelists, and we will be having this conversation for more than an hour, and Perong and I will be asking questions, but you are also given opportunity to ask questions. So in the chat box, if you have a question, just put question first in capital letters and then followed by your question, so that Ray will be able to see that question easily. Okay, so now to start the conversation. So Perong has given us an overview of the past two webinars, and we actually asked our panelists to watch the recording of those two conversations. So the first question, and each of you can share your thoughts on this. So what do you think should be added, modified, or stressed more regarding the question of what is evangelicalism, as explored in the previous two panel discussions? Okay, we would like to hear from each of you. And maybe we will start from the more senior from the four of our panelists. Dr. Simon Chan, can we give you the floor now? You're muted,
Okay.
Dr. Simon. Okay, good.
Right. I've unmuted myself. Okay.
You're okay now, yeah.
Yes, I'm okay now. Thank you for giving the most senior member of the panel the first say on things. Very Asian, isn't it? We defer to the elders, but it's not a good thing, just the thought that I'm the oldest. Anyway, the question, what do you think should be added, modified, or stressed? More regarding the question, what is evangelicalism, as explored in the previous two panel discussions? Now, if we take into consideration evangelical expressions in the majority world, I believe we should add that evangelicalism in Asia has a strongly sacramental dimension. Several years back, the missiologist Harold Turner, I'm sure you're familiar with that name, had noted that the primal religious context of Africa is deeply sacramental. And what he says about Africa resonates very much in the Asian primal religious context as well. For example, if you look at Chinese culture, ritual actions are extremely important. We think, for example, of the Book of Rites in Chinese culture. Rites are not just mere rituals. If you examine what the Book of Rites says, rites are transforming activities, transforming practices. It's interesting to note that long before these postmodern French philosophers like Bordeaux talked about the theory of practice. The ancient Book of Rites has already mentioned about the importance of practice being transforming in people's lives. So I think that the sacramental dimension, in fact, is a very important part of Asian evangelicalism.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simon Chan. And Dr. Jong-suk, as a church historian, we would like to hear from you. Dr. Jong-suk Lee?
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that means I'm the second oldest, I guess. I thought I'm the oldest. Well, thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, the what is evangelicalism? What needs to be more said and possibly supplemented from the list we have talked about in the previous discussions. And I was thinking about, and I thought that, we said everything good in the Bovington's quadrilateral and two others from the previous panels. So, but then I was thinking that, something like the very first one, the commitment to the Bible, this is ongoing truth ever since the beginning of the Christianity. And, for us, ever since the Reformation, Protestant Reformation, and the Reformation all about sola scriptura. And of course, there are many other things, but, sola scriptura was the very main idea the Protestant reformers had to come from. And then if we think about the Bible, Bible authority, which becomes final authority for all Christians. And this means in the 16th century, when Protestant Reformation had taken place, was very important because there was a church authority. There was authority of the traditions, which the church has had for a long time, for more than 1,000 years at the time. Then the Bible becomes the final authority here. But when I'm sure here a lot of people here had studied church history, and when you think about the beginning of Protestant Reformation, and from the very beginning, Luther, Zwingli, they were not really in agreement with the idea of the Holy Sacrament, especially with the Holy Communion. So there's a different understandings. After all, we all say about the essentials and non-essentials, things like this can be solved within ourselves. But then what I'm trying to say here is, commitment to the Bible, we, in a sense, need to be a little more clarified, need to clarify what we mean by commitment to the Bible, and how we can be really genuine about what we say when we say the commitment to the Bible. I think we all know this, but the genuineness of this commitment is really something we need to revisit, and something we need to think about it again. So that's one of the things I really like to say. And also I like to add, if I may add, I'd like to say, what about the healthy relationship between men and women, healthy relationship between human beings and creation, so in terms of creation care? So the first man and woman relationship it has been, we took it for granted, but now it has been greatly challenged, as we all know. Especially in Korea, it is the same-sex marriage and all the things related to this has been a hot issue, and it's we are in a sense on the verge of whether same-sex marriage becomes legalized or not. So a lot of Christian churches and evangelicals the forefront to talk about this and to go against possible legalization of this issue. So man and woman relationship, but then if we say just we are against something, that sometimes this really gives a bad idea. We become very the narrow-minded person. We don't really consider others human rights and all that. So there's a misunderstanding of what it means. So we need to clarify this as well. And creation care is another thing. And I hope I can talk about this a little more, and I also saw that Samuel, he's really involved in this as well. I'm very glad to see that. So, I hope we can talk about this later as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jung-Suk. And speaking of Samuel, may we hear from you, Dr. Samuel Richmond?
Thank you so much, Dr. Lua, for this opportunity. As I was going through the questions and also going through the two different panels that we had in past, especially when we are talking about the Bebbington quadrilateral, and there are like 4 points that evangelicalism, is framed and started. There is one word that we were using, but in Asian context, I feel that it is little sensitive, and that is the use of the term conversion. Conversion is quite a sensitive term now and can be problematic for several reasons, especially I'm talking about from Indian context, as well as if you look into the Pakistan, Nepal, even Bhutan. So these are the places, using this word conversion is little sensitive, because in India we have an anti-conversion law, and we have so many religions, traditions, and when we talk about this whole idea of conversion, it becomes really very difficult. What word can be used is more transformation, and this word transformation, it's a process. Usually, when we talk about conversion, it has been understood as like just you become Christian. No, it's a transformation. It goes, slowly, a process when a person is being transformed. Discipleship. These are the words like, we can talk about when we talk about the particular context. And when we go back to the early church fathers, they also use this terminology of transformation, new life. So we can emphasize on that more. Secondly, when we talk about Asian context, what we can add more is integral mission. Integral mission is also very important, where a strong emphasis on mission work, both locally and globally, can be done, and where now we are more discussing now on entrepreneurship. It's like, where mission is holistic, and then how we can talk about the transformation of society, transformation of life. I remember Dr. Sam Higginbottom, who was missionary to India, when he came to India early in late 19th century, early 19th century, and he established Allahabad Agricultural Institute. He came up with a motto that is gospel and plow. Although he was charged with social gospel, but still he emphasized on that in one hand you have a gospel, and on the other hand you have technology. So how we can integrate this in our system, when we talk about evangelicalism in Asia, and definitely creation care becomes part of it, because unless and until we are not associated with the people here, with the surrounding here, and how we can connect people with God and creation with God, that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samuel. Now, the youngest among the panelists, Yael.
Okay, so I can claim that. Hello, everyone. Good morning from Louisville. I am here in the U.S., spending my sabbatical from Ateneo in the Philippines. I'll speak as a sociologist to answer that question. I think it's a fantastic question, but I'll provide my perspective as a sociologist, and I have maybe 3 or 4 things that I want to highlight. I think when we want to reflect on evangelicalism in Asia, personally, I think evangelicalism is a cultural movement. In the past 2 sessions, we've been talking about evangelicalism as a theological category, commitment to the Bible, convictions, etc. And that's what we also heard thus far. But at the same time, we also heard from our previous speakers that there are cultural elements here with respect to the bigger culture where evangelicalism is located. So I think that's an important role, important facet to take seriously when we're thinking of evangelicalism in Asia. It is a cultural movement that is in a constant process of thinking about how it should relate to the wider culture in which it is embedded. And I say that, so one more time, I view evangelicalism in Asia, maybe it could also be the definition that you can use somewhere else. But I think as far as Asia is concerned, it's a cultural movement that is always in a constant process of reflecting on how it wants to relate to the bigger cultures in which it is embedded. Think about Asia, for example. I don't think there's one Asia, and that much is very clear. As we heard from Dr. Samuel Richmond, it's very different. I mean, if you are in South Asia, as evangelicalism might have a different experience, say in Singapore or in South Korea or in the Philippines, where evangelicalism plays a more prominent role politically, culturally. So we have to be sensitive to these distinctions. With respect to evangelicalism as a cultural movement that wants to engage the bigger cultures, what sort of restrictions are it confronted? What sort of issues is it allowed to talk about? And what sort of issues is it not allowed to talk about? Can it talk about same-sex marriage in places in South Asia? But in South Korea, it can, as we heard from Dr. Jung Suk Lee just now. In the Philippines, it's certainly the case. So those are questions that I want to raise as we think about evangelicalism as a cultural movement engaging bigger cultures. But at the same time, I also wanted to say that you can also think of evangelicalism in Asia as a shared culture across different countries in terms of the words that we use, the literature that we read, the songs that we sing, the shared practices. Just at the start, Dr. Simon Chan talked about Pierre Bourdieu, a sociologist also, who defines the culture as a way of behaving or practices, a set of practices. And that's another way of looking at evangelicalism. I remember when I was growing up, when I was a teenager or in my university days, I would wear the baller. You remember that? The wrist baller, WWJD. What would Jesus do? And then when I moved to Singapore, where I studied, I realized that, many evangelicals were also wearing that. I thought it was a Filipino thing. And apparently it was an evangelical thing. So that's what I'm saying. So we can look at evangelicalism as a set of practices, cultural practices, but it's always in relation to the wider culture in which it is embedded. The big question is, how does it want to engage the bigger culture? Is it confrontational? Is it accommodating? Is it more negotiating? Is it more navigating? These are big questions in a multi-diverse context of Asia. I'll end there for now. Thanks, Dr. Teresa.
Thank you so much. Wow, very rich. Perun, please go ahead with the next question.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you very much for the questions, the answers so far. I would like to zoom in a bit more about maybe what you said, JL, but you've also linked it together a bit, Samuel. But when we talk about evangelicals, the face of evangelicals, the thing that comes to our mind looking at the fact that I'm talking about the Babington Quadrilateral, we think about it as a very foreign face that in many ways is linked to colonialism. So my question to all of you is, how has the Asian Evangelical Church managed this? And what do you think needs to be done? What more needs to be done about it? I'm going to flip the switch, since we should not start always with the oldest, and I shall not pick on the youngest. So I'm going to start with Samuel. We keep everyone on their toes.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Actually, you see, what happened is Christianity from Asia, it went to West, and then later on from West, it came back to Asia. Now, the way it came back, it has really dominated most of our countries, most of the denominations that came to India, from different countries from the West. It has made a great impact, but that impact has also affected affected many Asian countries. In fact, I don't know whether you know about Robin Boyd. He talked about the pot, the plant with the pot and a soil, and denomination came from the West in a pot. But in most of the cases, the foreign soil was not able to mix with the Asian soil, with the Indian soil, or with the Chinese soil, and there are always, separation. So that has made an impact. So, to my understanding, there is a revival that is taking place. There are movements which are taking place, whether we talk about India, whether we talk about China, Japan, and other places. Vibrant movements are happening. Um Recently, I'll come back to it later. I think in 2022, I think, yes, there's an article which was published in India Today. India Today is one of the very leading magazines in India, and they talked about pastors of Punjab. And in that, they talked about that no foreign mission came to Punjab and started Christianity there. Now, the present movement I'm talking about, and it's a very indigenous movement. They talked about Langat, Sangat, and Pangat, means like sitting together, eating together, worshipping together, and that is emerging. That is very, very based on our context, Indian context. So similarly, a lot of things are happening. So now Christianity is responding from Asian perspective, and we need to respond to it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samuel. I've just rewritten the question because I have surprised my panel with this. So for those who want to read it, this is where the question is. Perhaps if there is probably a very sociological perspective for this, so I will let our sociologists go for it and let our other people think about it more.
I'm assuming I'm the sociologist.
Yes.
This is a tricky question. And I think this goes back also to what I said. It's with evangelicalism as a cultural movement that's always in a constant negotiation with how it relates to the rest of the bigger cultures. If you talk about evangelicalism in places like the Philippines or Singapore, we can argue, or South Korea, we can argue that evangelicalism in these contexts has become indigenized, if I could use that word, in the sense that it has become fully embraced as a local religion. Because as the literature would put it, maybe Dr. Jung Sok Lee has more things to say about this in the context of South Korea, precisely because it has already intersected with local cultural practices. In the Philippine context, I say this in the context of how evangelical churches that emerged, say, in the 1970s and 1980s. This was in the time of the martial law, and there was a process of democratization. A lot of churches were emerging at that time, and they became spaces for people to reflect on issues of, this is in the 1970s, issues of what does it mean to be Christian in relation to an authoritarian regime? That was a big question back then. And then at the turn of the century, evangelicalism, and in my own research, I noticed a lot of them became mega churches. They became very influential. There was a switch when many of them became mega churches, big churches, those that were established in the 1970s and 1980s. They started targeting young people, focusing on young people, and talking about things that would appeal to that particular segment of the population that is aspiring for social mobility. So if you have in the 1970s, or upward social mobility, more stable in life. So if in the 1970s the political context, the social context was a little chaotic, and that was the Christianity reflected drew on a lot of the theology of struggle. At the turn of the century, the 21st century, a lot of evangelical churches started to embrace teachings that had to do with blessings and prosperity and the desire for social mobility. So that is one way of looking at how many of these churches have interfaced with local contexts, and that's how I'm looking at indigenization. I know that in the literature, indigenization has to do with enculturation, relating to adopting local cultural practices, the language and the beliefs and so forth. That's one way of looking at it. But as a sociologist, I'm also looking at indigenization in terms of how evangelical churches relate to the big issues that matter to people that they are serving. So I feel that in places like Singapore, Philippines, South Korea, many evangelical churches have indigenized in that sense. In other contexts, it's always still it's still a struggle because of restrictions. To what extent can they play that role? As a countercultural movement, if you will, that converts or transforms lives, as Dr. Samuel Richmond puts it, or will it forever be on the fringe, trying just to do what it can do away from the gaze of the government or of the state or restrictions? I'll just put it there and let the others say their piece. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would let Dr. Simon now go for it before letting our church historian, Dr. Lee, have the last word. Dr. Simon, please. You are muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Nope. You're still muted. You're muted. Someone needs to unmute you.
Dr. Simon, you are muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I've unmuted myself.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think I would like to deal with that particular question that was asked. How has the Asian Evangelical Church managed this perception that Christianity is a foreign religion? I think Dr. Cornelio has just summed up the whole issue pretty well by telling us how evangelical churches have adopted some of the core beliefs and practices from other let's say descending bodies, for example, mission organizations and so forth, and have in some places indigenized themselves. And cites the example of Singapore, Korea, and so forth. And the example of like the mega churches and all that. I think we need to be clear about one important thing. The gospel, however it is proclaimed, at its core is also a scandal. It challenges culture, it challenges society, it talks about a different way of life, a whole a set of values which are antithetical to that of the world, to use the Johannine language. Yeah. And so Christianity always has this other aspect where, whether you like it or not, it will be seen as somewhat foreign, yeah, because of the scandal of the cross. Okay. But still, the church has recognized the need to connect with culture. But then at the same time, there's always the issue of to what extent we do that. Here is where the theology of contextualization and all that comes in. Yeah. There are some people, some churches. I think, for example, of the Roman Catholic Church in Malaysia, they have so contextualized the gospel that in some of their practices, you can't tell the difference between the Taoist practice of ancestral worship and the Catholic practice of venerating their ancestors. Yeah. They have become so closely identified, yeah, as to become indistinguishable. I have a former student, a Catholic friend, who has actually shown me videos that are actually quite frightening when you think about it and when you look at it. Yeah. So I think that evangelicalism at least has this consciousness that while we contextualize, while we try to engage our culture, while we enculturate, we need to also maintain the distance between our faith and the culture in which we live. Yeah, that's so much for now.
Thank you very much. Very deep words. Dr. Lee, would you like to answer this question, please? Hi.
Unlike many other Asian countries, Korea was not colonized by Western countries. So the Christianity wasn't a colonized religion. And that really was a opportunity for Koreans to be able to close to the new religion, which is Christianity. But it was foreign religion, of course, in the beginning. But then soon Koreans realized that it is a true religion that's universal, and the God we have been thinking about wasn't the real God, that was natural God, but then God, true God, triune God, Christian God is God of creation. So that realization really changed Koreans to be, in a sense, easier to get close to foreign religion, Christianity, and then embrace that as their religion. So that is very clear in the early literatures and the witnesses of Korean Christians at the late 19th century and early 20th century. And very immediately, the early Christians in Korean, they adopted this Nevius method, which is very famous in history of missions, especially in China. The missionary Nevius came to Korea and lectured on his own method, how he evangelized Chinese, to make Christians. So the Koreans immediately adopted that Nevius method, which is three self-supporting, self-propaganda, which is self-evangelism, and self-government, self-governing. So three self, this independence movement, which really changed the face of Korean Christianity, Korean church. So as early as early 20th century, Koreans wanted to have their own building, wanted to have their own governing system and all that. So I think it really thankful. I'm very thankful for that part of history. But at the same time, when I look at the history, Korean church history, I'm sure it has some relevance to the history of other parts of Asian churches. So when I look at that, the very strong, the earnest desire to be independent, and but at the same time, very strong aspiration or desire to be like Western Christians. So that's everywhere. You look at the early Christian newspapers and the sermons and all the articles, and it has very strong statement in all these the Americans or European countries, because they adopted Christianity as early as possible. Their country, their the education and the men and women, they are all very advanced and different. They are leading the world and all that. So I think it's great. For early Korean Christians, they were very much focusing on education, their children's education, and teaching the Bible in the church, so that they had to teach Korean first. So, Korean Christians, they, as early as possible, they become literate, they become educated, and they have courage to leave the country and to get more educated, from Western countries and all that. So it really became the power, driving force for Korean economic growth throughout ages. But then we also have this, it also leaves this mentality that the sort of, now we can say the prosperity gospel type of understanding of Christianity. So, if you are Christian, you got to be wealthy. If you are Christian, you got to be successful. If you are Christian, you have to be good in everything. You have to lead, and you have to become leader and all that. So I think there's, this very indigenization Christian movement as early as possible in Korea, really changed the face of Christianity in Korea, and certainly increased Christian population here. But at the same time, without necessary criticism or the reflection of what it means to be the Western Christianity, that part we have not thought about much. But of course, nowadays, we are talking about this very freely and more deeply. So things are more changing. But then the church, when that's among scholars and theologians and in the theological schools, but when you go to church, church level, still the church growth and numbers and the amount of offering, the size of building, these are still very important value, and that's shared among pastors. So something we have to think about it as well.
Thank you very much. So we have already talked about certain uniqueness of Christianity in different contexts in Asia. So this is more of just focusing now on the uniqueness of evangelicalism in Asia, and what do we see as we can say this is something that we are doing right. Okay, so what do evangelicals in Asia get right and need to stress more faithfully as compared to the experience of evangelicalism that has developed in the United States, for example? So what is there to contribute in terms of the things that we're doing right here in Asia as compared, for example, to what's going on in the United States? We want to stress this more faithfully, these things that we're doing right. Okay, I'll just let you volunteer, whoever would like to speak first.
Okay. Could I have a go at it first?
First, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think we need to we need to set evangelicalism, the evangelicalism as we know it in Asia and in other parts of the world, in its broader context. I think that much of what we describe as evangelicalism is a product of 19th century evangelicalism from the West, especially the US and the UK. Is this kind of evangelicalism that has, defined the way we think about the gospel. Okay. And there's been a lot of historical studies to highlight this point. Take, for example, the strong emphasis on the individual is very much a product of 19th century evangelicalism from the West. And I think we inherited that. And we continue to develop our understanding of the gospel largely from an individualistic point of view. This is seen, for example, in the much of the popular songs that are being sung in evangelical churches today. The bulk of this are very individualistic. And you can see them going back to the gospel songwriters of the 19th century. I think what evangelicalism in Asia can do to correct that is a sense of corporateness, the sense of our identity being part of a larger group, a community. It's the community that defines or gives me my identity. It's not the case that I am who I think I am, a la Descartes. Yeah. And this sense of being part of a larger community, I think is something that you see something of, you see emphasized in earlier forms of evangelicalism. For example, in the Wesleys, you can see that in the hymns of the Wesleys, there's a sense of the corporate life together, juxtaposed to a more personal understanding of the faith. And I think that we have within Asia something that we can contribute to reshaping our understanding of evangelicalism in the wider world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simon. It's very powerful. Anyone else from the panel?
Yes. Should I share?
Yes, please.
Okay, ma'am. Yeah, definitely, Asia evangelicalism has much more to give to the world. And what Professor has said rightly. One of the things is what we talk about, the cultural context. So from traditional, we are more into cultural. What we have received, we praise God for that. But more we have to get into the context. And theology needs to be developed from that. I don't know how many of you know Sadhu Sundar Singh. Sadhu Sundar Singh was from India, and he was from a Sikh background and encountered Christ while he was praying, seeking God, and his life was changed. And he shared about his life and about his testimony in number of books. And he used to wear, a sadhu dress in saffron color. So Christian missionaries from America encouraged him to adopt Western dress and costume. Otherwise, he would not be taken seriously. But what Sadhu believed was that such cultural trappings were not just extraneous to preaching the gospel, but antithetical. He was known as barefoot evangelist. And once when he was traveling in one of the parts of a country, India, there was a Brahmin of a high class, and he was trying to, get into the moving train, but he couldn't, and he fell down. And it was very hot at that time, and he was lying on the platform. And one Anglo-Indian station master was quite anxious to help him. So he brought him some water in a European cup. But he said, I cannot drink that water. I would prefer to die. But then what happened? Sadhu Sundar Singh brought water to him in his own vessel, Indian vessel. and he drank eagerly, you know. And that's the way where Asians do need the water of life in Asian cup rather than in a European cup. So this type of engagement is very much required when we talk about evangelicalism in Asia.
Thank you very much. Jael or Jungsuk, you have anything to add? Yeah.
Sure. Okay. It's a tough question, to be honest. It's also a tricky question because it's one of those questions that you would like to discuss in your class privately, but not in a public setting like this because it can be very controversial. But let me just take a shot. And I'm in the US right now. Sometimes I wonder, as far as my familiarity with the Philippine context is concerned, sometimes I wonder if evangelicalism in the Philippines is really different from our North American counterparts. I say this because many Christians in the country are reading literature produced in North America, reading theologians, preachers, who are. You're smiling, Dr. Teresa. I know you can recognize this. We know the names, right? The circuit. There seems to be this circulation, of the same songs, books, preachers, theologies among many Christian churches in the Philippines. In a way, directly imported from the West, if I could put it that way. Just think about this. When I was growing up, everybody read I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Of course, that became very controversial later on, but many of us from that generation would know what I'm talking about, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. But there was no counterpart in the Philippines. It's only now, it's only more recently that these developments are emerging, local reflections. And then at the same time, we also echo, again, Philippine context. I feel this might be the same. Yeah, I guess that I can see the comment in the chat box. I can also see that in many cases, we also echo the culture wars that evangelicals are playing here in the US. In Asia, same-sex marriage, divorce is a big deal right now in the Philippines because of a new divorce legislation and so forth. So again, I'm saying all of that just to show that there seem to be resonances with how Christians, at least in the Philippine context, are trying to are internalizing, the ethos that they find with North American counterparts. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. But having said all of that, I feel that one of the blessings, if I could put it that way, of evangelicalism, at least the kind of evangelicalism that I experienced in Philippines and in Singapore, and in the many interactions that I've had with so many other Asian counterparts over the years, I think there's a lot of attention being given now on young people. The concern for the youth. I don't know if it's a uniqueness. I hope not, but I think it's a powerful thing that you have a lot of Christians in evangelicals in Asia who are really concerned about the youth on so many levels. On one hand, I think it's primarily triggered by the concern that, okay, we don't want to be like the West where Christianity is declining. So we want to take care of the next generation. So the West is like the mirror or the crystal ball that tells us what we will be like in the next 50 years. We don't want to be like that, so we want to arrest that. So we want to take care of the youth right now. And I say this because I'm also working with Asian Methodists, for example, the Asian Methodist Council. They've got fantastic interventions right now. They want to focus on the youth. But of course, the big question is, what does it mean to be concerned about the youth? It's a theological question, but it's also a sociological question. Is it about making sure that they toe the line and we make sure that they say what we want them to say? Or is it about being concerned about their own contexts? And we know that in many Asian countries, fast-growing economies of Asia, a lot of young people are getting left behind. Inflation, higher cost of living. It's so difficult to live right now. And that's one of the explanations for the decline in fertility. I feel that this is where, because of those anxieties, evangelical churches have a bigger role to play in really helping them. So it's not just a theological question. It's also about really being sensitive to the social needs of young people. But just the same, I want to acknowledge that a lot of evangelical churches that I'm familiar with are really paying attention to the situation of young people. Thank you.
Amen. That's very, very important. Thank you, Jael. Joseph, do you have something to add?
Yes, I very appreciate what Dr. Joyce just talked about the young people's situation in Asia. But it is, I think it's all together in Asia or throughout the world, you know, the concern of young people and young evangelicals, our prayers and our concerns. But I do have a strong hope that the young people in Asia, they are from the church where the Bible teaching and reading was much emphasized, and prayers and worship, the regular prayers and worship also much strongly emphasized. And at the same time, evangelism and mission was taught, very well as well. So I think they do have a great legacy and tradition, as long as they regular attendant to the church. So I think it's not just young people, it is about Asia and Asian churches. Very much interested in all these very basic and important, Christian practices. So I am very glad, and I'm at the same time very proud of being Asian Christian in this sense. Then we may also think about, I think Asia altogether are struggling to be true to the Christian discipleship. I'm recently reading a book club, with my students. We are reading John Stott's Radical Disciple, and he gives 8 characteristics of radical disciple. And reading through with the students, I'm really thinking about again and again that how well, in fact, this is just a little bit of the sort of joke. I when I actually studied that, because I chose the book because it's a Lausanne 4th Congress year, so I wanted make my student to be more aware of what John Stott had written and what John Stott had done for evangelization of the world. So that's how. But then I had this question. I'm getting old, and do I still have to be interested in being radical disciple? I have not done that enough. Can I have some more peace and rest? But then I read through. That book was written at his age of 88. It was the last book of John Stott, as you may know well, and he was still struggling to relay what it means to be radical disciple, how we should live as radical disciple, and how he struggled to live one of those. And I deeply challenged me, in fact, and there's no age limit. In fact, everybody, every Christian has to be a radical disciple, and has to demonstrate a characteristic or more than 8 characteristics. That's his list, and he encouraged us to come up with our own list. anyway, what I'm trying to say here is, I think we Asians, we criticized this sort of westernized version of Christianity, but then the many Asians, and I see from many Asians, I'm including myself, we really want to be like one of those, a Western Christians, rich, nice looking and comfortable and having everything and intelligent and all that. So I think it's a great, if we can have all that and still good radical disciple, that's great. But at the same time, we really have to have a power to live poor, power to live having less, power to live as a as a disciple of Jesus Christ until the last minute we can breathe. I think the Asians as a whole, I feel that we are always looking for more. But is it really a true face of Christianity? I'm constantly asking myself, and I like to pose this to you all. Yeah, I don't know whether it is a good response to the question itself, but it's all related, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are lots of rich things that we are thinking about. I want to shift gears slightly onto the think about labels. There are lots of people who talk about, should we kiss evangelicalism goodbye? What is the difference between a Protestant and an evangelical? What is the difference between a Pentecostal and an evangelical? So I want to ask my sociologist, Dr. Cornelio, and my systematic theologian, Dr. Simon Chan, would you say labels are necessary? And would you say, and perhaps from a systematic professor, is there a quantifiable difference in these labels, especially in Asia? Evangelicals, Protestants, and Pentecostals. Yep, go for it.
So it's me now. I was going to defer to Professor Chan, but to be honest, it's tricky. There's so many things going on in my mind right now. But the question you're asking, Perong, is should we abandon the label? Or are you asking me more whether evangelicalism is a category, this is a useful category? Can you just help me again think through this?
I mean, I'm thinking of it with regards to I kiss evangelicalism goodbye.
Okay. Okay.
It's a bad thing since it's related to the West. So the label itself, not the category.
Okay, so okay, gotcha. To be honest, a lot of people, I think there's a this calls for good research. This calls for solid research, especially in I imagine this would be a very good research to do in Singapore, in South Korea, in Hong Kong, the Philippines, where evangelicalism is associated with quote unquote conservative perspectives. Conservative perspectives that no longer resonate with young people's perspectives. So this goes back to what I said just now about young people, the attention to the youth. So part of it is concern about secularization, but also part of it is concern about young people. We're losing the young people to the dark side. And so we want them to rein them in and make sure that they are still professing the theologies that we have been professing all this time. So I think that's part of it. And I'm certainly seeing that in my own research, working with young people in the Philippines. You have a lot of young people who are disappointed that the churches, their pastors, and they belong to mega churches, are not preaching enough about issues of the day, right? And always resorting to the default evangelical quote unquote topics, blessing and discipleship and so forth, and those concepts that many of us are familiar with. But these young people are asking for tough for asking tough questions. I feel so. Therefore, should evangelicalism be abandoned? I'll give us a more the sociological answer is at the end of the day, it's the churches that will have to the ball is in the court of the evangelicals, and I say that, and by that I mean, is it worth hanging on to? Is it worth holding on to? Is that ball worth carrying to the other side of the court? I say this because, and I say this with so much respect also, and an acknowledgement of really the issues at stake here. You've got a lot of young people who are disillusioned with this. And to think that evangelicalism is not a majority religion in the Philippines, you already have a lot of young people who are questioning, okay, is this the kind of confession that I still want to maintain? If it's going to be associated with homophobia, if it's going to be associated with siding with authoritarian politics, if it's going to be associated with illiberal forms of democracy and so forth, is this a kind of Christianity that I still believe in? I feel that those are the questions, those are the issues that young people are asking right now. And I feel that the churches have to confront that. I think that's the question that that we have to deal with in the next couple of years. So I'm not answering the question directly because I feel that the ball is not in the court of our young people. The ball is in the court of the churches themselves, if I could put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chan. You're still muted.
I need to unmute
Yeah.
myself. Okay. I think there's a need to define what we mean by evangelicalism. I think that a lot of times we kind of conflate the theological meaning of evangelicalism with the maybe historical and sociological meaning of evangelicalism. I think that as a sociological phenomenon, even as a historical phenomenon, the evangelical movement has a lot of issues, a lot of baggages that it has to address. And I think this is one of the reasons why the word evangelical and related terms have been, have acquired a rather negative connotation. But if we look at what it means to be evangelical theologically, I think that there's a lot that's going for evangelicalism. And evangelicalism actually shares a lot in common with core beliefs within older traditions that predate the evangelical or even the Protestant movement. I think of Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Within these large bodies, there are certain core beliefs and values that resonate with evangelicals. And I think that because of the impact of secularism in the West in particular, evangelicals are coming more and more to see that they have more in common with Catholicism and Orthodoxy than with those that promote certain secular values, such as mainline Protestantism in the West. You have, for example, a group like evangelicals and Catholics together, people who are engaged in dialogue. Evangelicals and Catholics engaging in dialogue and coming to a lot of common understanding of what it means to be evangelical and to be faithful Catholics at the same time. And it's the same with Orthodoxy and evangelicals. We have, for example, the Lausanne Orthodox Initiative. Again, with similar impulses, evangelicals coming to see that theologically they share a lot in common with these older traditions. And I think that if we understand evangelicalism in terms of its theological beliefs or confession, then we need to retain that term. But I recognize that, historically, evangelicalism has its problems, particularly the kind that came out of the 19th century. And that's the kind that's influenced much of the evangelicalism in Asia. I think there are lots of it that we can jettison and go back to older traditions and recover what is theologically valuable within evangelicalism.
Thank you very much. Now, we will have a question focused on India, but I think this question is also relevant even to other countries. So here's the question, and I'm sure Samuel is eager to respond to this. So evangelicalism finds it very hard to make huge inroads into the poorer and less educated section of the population, unlike Pentecostalism or Catholicism. It's an important question because more than 76% of Indian Christians can be described as underprivileged. But as far as I understand, according to John David, of Indian Christians, Indian evangelicalism belongs to the elite Christian, which is more westernized, rich, and educated demography. So how can we take evangelicalism to the underprivileged?
Yeah, see, what had happened is that we have received gospel, and we proclaim gospel further, and it is like a capsule. In many denominations, some pastors think it is just to share God's word, and it begins with, you are a sinner and you need to repent. And you are a sinner, you need to repent, you need Christ, and then you'll get eternal life. And sometimes you feel this is the gospel, and what I have done is over. But Bible does not begin with this. Bible begins with, we are created in the image and likeness of God. So when we talk about, whether we talk about social oppressions, we talk about caste system, we talk about creation care, image of God is really very important. And to begin, the sharing about Christ, if we begin with that we all are created in the image of God, then that mindset will be removed. And in that way, even the poor, those who are coming from the poor background, we will treat them equally. Caste system has divided us severely. It's not just in Hinduism, but it has entered in Christianity also in India. Many parts of our country, you will find that. And the poor are being deprived. And we try to claim ourselves that, okay, we know the gospel, and gospel is for these people, of that people. We don't go for the transformation, the real transformation. Now, when Dr. Sam Higginbottom came, I want to go back to him, and even William Carey and other great missionaries who came to India. When they saw the need, they said, we will share the gospel, but along with the gospel, we will try to transform their life. So in one hand, gospel, and the other hand is plow. So plow is a technology, as I shared with you. So feed the hungry and serve the land. And we cannot just share the gospel when people are empty stomach. So that's why integral mission is very important. Integral mission, holistic mission is very important. That will help them to come up. So created in the image of God will give them the identity that they belong to God, they belong to Christ, and it will give equal status to everyone, and also will compel us to help them to succeed, to develop themselves, and then we'll see the harmony and oneness and equality.
Thank you very much. Well, there is an interesting question here from my friend, from Dr. Riyad Cassis, the International Director of Langham. So is it relevant and feasible to know what evangelicalism is being understood by people from outside our evangelical circles? Should we consider also what the non-evangelicals are saying about us? Who would like to respond to that?
Can I respond to that?
Please.
I think that, again, we need to ask, are we understanding that term theologically or historically? If we are thinking of evangelicalism as a historical movement, of course, we distinguish it from a lot of other movements. And that is, by the way, the way that Babington defines evangelicalism. It is basically a historical study, and from which he derives these four characteristics. Okay? And it covers a certain period of time. And this also explains why that descriptive definition needs to be expanded as evangelicalism expands through time and through different contexts and cultures. Okay. But I think that if we define evangelicalism theologically, then I would say that the way in which we distinguish evangelicalism would be to define it in relation to or in contrast to non-evangelical Christianity. I'm thinking here primarily of mainline Protestantism in the West, which has largely become secularized. Yeah. Liberalism within Catholicism, yeah, and such like. But theologically, evangelicalism, as I mentioned earlier on, has a lot in common with older traditions theologically. And so we need to make those distinctions in order to answer that question.
Thank you very much. We're almost at the end of this webinar. And if there is somebody here in the panel that is really eager to contribute another insight, it's your turn, maybe just one or two, and then we'll give it to Ray for the summary.
If I may,
Please.
please. I know Dr. Joksukli also wants to say something, but I'll be very, very quick. I have the impression that the question is about reputation, the reputation of evangelicals in Asia today. And yes, it is theological, yes, it is historical, but I think it's also very sociological. If we understand evangelicalism as a cultural movement, the question that we need to ask is, how is it perceived by non-evangelicals as a cultural movement? Is it an all-embracing cultural movement, or is it an exclusivist cultural movement? And I think that is where I feel where the big issues lie. And again, in the Philippine context, evangelicals are associated with a lot of good things, obviously, right? The mega churches, the big churches, and all the fantastic, Bible studies and the experiences that young people would get there. But we should also acknowledge that evangelicalism is associated with certain policies that or certain attitudes that or values that young people may not necessarily agree with, from gender equality to family life, etc. So yeah, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.
Yes, I like to respond to both Pei Long's question about labeling among Christians, the evangelicals, Protestants, and Pentecostals, and Teresa Lua's question, how non-evangelicals people think about evangelicals. And I think the labeling itself has, I mean, to me, it has quite a inherent defect because everything came out of Protestant Reformation. There, how can we really say that you are Protestant, you are evangelical? Of course, there are distinctions, but I think but with the labeling and this categorization, we tend to emphasize on differences among us. And of course, we are different. Each Christian may be different, but I think is this something we are really trying to do here? I think we need to engage each other. We need to relate to every Christian. What we have in common. What's our confession? What is our understanding of Jesus Christ, our salvation, and all that. So I think that's very important, especially this time. Churches are so divided and Christians are so divided. Something we need to think about. I think it has to do with an evangelical versus non-evangelical. We always think the labeling. If you are Catholic, or I'm evangelical. We have nothing in common. I don't think that this is the right way to. Even Protestant reformers, they always make like John Calvin. They always make the room that there are the person, the Christian, who really understand what Christianity means in the Catholic Church. It's not like oversweeping the attitude toward the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church. We really have to think about person and have to think about Christians. So I think we need to look for what we believe, how we can work together for the mission of God. I think that's something we need to cultivate in Asia more, so that we can be more united. We can work together for good of the Lord.
Thank you so much. Great way to end. Thank you, panelists. But we still have Ray to give us the summary. Ray?
Thanks for the interest and not only our panelists, all the participants. Given an amazing question.
I'm sorry, Ray, the sound is not good.
I'm just saying that we would like to thank not only our very insightful panelists, but also the participants who had said, which are really, really interesting. We just run out of time, and even I have very short time. Just say that there are a lot of things that we can celebrate as evangelicals in Asia. The very beautiful sacramental dimension that we have, the emphasis we have on transformation, the holistic change that we are looking for, that we could not ignore, and also the relationships that we treasure, not only between men and women, but with a creation care also. And it's also great that when we dealt with the question of the foreign faith, we said that evangelicals in Asia are also active in the sense of we are able to indigenize even things that are from the outside. So indigenization gains a different layer of meaning here, not just looking back towards the past, but also the power to turn and embrace something and evolve it as something with a uniquely Asian flavor, but also acknowledging as well that we are still facing tensions and challenges, because as much as we would like to say that there are deep and widespread theological resources that we could use to define ourselves, our identity, evangelicals is also a sociological movement, as our friend has said. And we are not only defining ourselves, people around us whom we are witnessing are also defining us also as a body of Christ. And what is good with one of our panelists said is that we are an active community, but the movement environment wherein we are moving is also changing. And again, maybe that dynamics of change is what will bring life and continuous energy for us to grapple with the question of what is evangelicalism. So it is not, we're not looking for one answer here. We are looking like for a process and inviting the remembering that we are not just a generation who are indebted in this community, but also the next generation who will kind of follow us. And I think it's good to end on that note, that these conversations should continue. And we need to have more good conversations. And I just so love that we have had this. So Ate Teresa, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really enjoyed this conversation. We're grateful to the panelists. And please watch for the next conversation. It will be evangelicalism in Africa. And you're also welcome to join. Thank you so much.